These two friends turned podcasters managed to find a unique format for their podcast, which is not an easy task in today's podcasting landscape. Finding a gap in the market can be hugely rewarding though. Each week, musicians Roger Heathers and Declan Kitchener write a brand new song and then discuss the songwriting process on their podcast, the Weekly Song Podcast. And in this episode of Podcasting Amplified, they share how they were able to come up with a unique idea and build a loyal following off the back of it. We also cover the numerous avenues for monetising your podcast, how to choose the right sponsors and approach them, what it's been like to co-host a podcast as friends, the marketing challenges we face as podcasters, the art of balancing SEO and readability in your podcast titles, the importance and challenges of crafting quality show notes, and plenty more. Declan and Roger share a fascinating story of their unique podcast that's worth tuning in for any podcaster. Roger and Declan, thank you for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How's it going?
It's going
great,
really well.
It's the first time we've got a double interview on the show, so this will be interesting.
Thank you for having us, Joe. Really lovely to be on your show.
So Roger and Declan are two musicians and they decided to start a podcast. It's called the Weekly Song Podcast, and they write a new song every week and then share the song on the podcast, and they discuss the theory and the process of writing the music, and talk about various technicalities of the music, and yeah, I'm just amazed at how you managed to both write a song every single week, and you've been doing this for quite a few years now. So whose idea was it originally to make this as a podcast?
I think we remember it slightly differently. Because the thing with the podcast is we just have these conversations anyway. It's kind of just an extension of what we're like. So the way I remember it is that we were watching things like That Pedal Show and things like that, and Roger was already doing a song a week for a period, and we just sort of thought, well, why don't we just try and broadcast this thing that we just both like talking about, and can we sort of get it to a reasonable enough level that we could keep it ongoing? I don't know how that matches up with your recollections, Roger.
Well, I've got a terrible memory, but I remember that around the time that I was doing the weekly song thing in the beginning, I'd done about 7 of them or something, and we were having a conversation, Declan and I, about the weekly song thing, and Declan started writing weekly as well, and we just send each other songs on Facebook Messenger or whatever we were using at the time, just like, oh hey, here's my weekly song, just so that we can kind of keep each other accountable. We used to use the analogy of like a running partner, and at one point Declan said, you know what, we should make this into a podcast, like That Pedal Show, I think was the thing you said. And I said, no way. I said I'd be so shy on the microphone, I couldn't speak on a microphone, it would be terrible. And so I resisted, and then eventually Declan pushed me into it, and I'm so grateful he did, because now we have the podcast and we've been doing it for ages now. So
Yeah, I'm just having a look now. You're on, what is it, 156 episodes?
Something like that.
Have you kept it consistent then? Has it been easy enough to keep it going week to week?
Well, we don't do it every single week. We were actually talking about this the other day, in the sense that it's a kind of more like a show than it is like a traditional podcast. It's called the Weekly Song Podcast, but our core listener base, they're quite familiar with the fact that we record in seasons. So right now we're on season 17 of the show, and what we do is we write for 7 weeks at a time. And then we'll often do like a bonus episode or maybe an interview or something with somebody. And then we'll take off a few months because that's kind of the rhythm we found works best.
But also because of the nature of having to write, 7 or 8 songs in a go, you sort of need to live life experiences to be able to sort of bring some of that in, which, you can keep that going week to week, but at the same time it does just give that breathing space so that you've got a bit more time to sort of gather forces back together for the next season.
Yeah, I mean, it takes me ages to write music, and yeah, I can imagine the burnout as well. Like, you get burnt out from producing a podcast episode every week anyway, but if you're also writing music, and it's the creativity and the heart that goes into that, I can imagine just constant writing must be a bit of a strain.
It certainly can be. At the same time, I feel like the fact that we keep each other accountable, and for the time we're doing the podcast, that we have a deadline. I feel like we talk about this on the show sometimes, of like having a deadline for writing a song is actually really, really good for your productivity. Because I think without the deadlines, this is why I started doing it in the beginning. Is like without the deadlines, you could be like, oh, I've got a great verse for a song, or I've thought of a great chorus in the shower. I'll finish it sometime. You know what I mean? Whereas like when you've got I had to get done by Sunday, you kind of like pull your socks up sort of thing.
Yeah.
You can't go around thinking like, oh, that's a good idea, but like, what if I have a better idea down the line? You sort of have to go, no, this is the idea I have. Let's make this work. Let's kind of like bring as much as we can out of it.
I'm not sure that I've heard of a podcast that does exactly this format. Did you sort of come up with the idea yourself, or were you, I know you said you were influenced by that pedal show. Have you heard another show where they're writing every week for it?
Not that I'm aware of. I think this literally just grew out of the fact that we did do like the songwriting sort of thing together, trying to keep each other accountable. I think it's also just the fact that we don't tend to write together very often, if that makes sense. Like we sort of each embarking on this individually, so that just kind of informs, obviously. Each of us having like something slightly unknown to show the other. So it's just basically function. There's no grand thought put into it. That describes quite a lot of the podcast, but it's all working so far.
Yeah. The same thing for you, Roger.
Pretty much the same thing. I think for me personally, when I started writing a song per week, I think because I do a little bit of art, like just for like fun, just for a hobby. I'm not great at drawing, but I've seen some YouTubers who they'll make sure that they draw on a consistent basis and give themselves deadlines just so they can kind of keep their hand in and keep practicing. And also the Inktober challenge, which is a thing on Instagram where people are given a prompt every day of October to draw something in that, around that word. Just the whole thing of a deadline kind of, I think, appealed to both of us, just because, like I say, otherwise we'd be quite serial procrastinators,
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a good position to be in, because most people who are going to start a podcast, they'll think of an idea and it's been done, a dozen times or more before. And it's really hard to stand out. So the fact that you've got that kind of niche helps. Have you got much feedback from the listeners over the years? And do you find that it helps that you've got quite a unique format?
I feel like the fact that we kind of have this format means that any feedback we get is helpful. We don't get a ton of feedback as far as like how to structure the show or anything, but we do interact with our listeners quite a lot. It kind of feels like a community sometimes, but at the same time, I feel like it's just been a natural evolution as far as like we've introduced items, dropped items, in very loose terms items. And we just kind of found a rhythm that works, We take it in turns as to who goes first to show their song to the other person on the podcast every week. So that's kind of the main bit of the show. We have the intro, and then it's like, if I'm introducing the show, I'll be like, and Declan's, going first this week, and then Declan will go, my song is called this. We'll play the song, we'll play the MP3 of the song. In the old days, we used to do this in person when we lived nearer to each other.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
And we would be in the same room with guitars or at the piano and be and that was kind of a little bit more dynamic, because it was we both had these songs in our heads and we bring our notebooks along or whatever with our music in them, our lyrics, and it would be a big surprise. But now we kind of have it so we play an MP3, we record a demo of the song we've written, listen to the MP3, discuss it, then the next person goes, we listen to that demo, and then we kind of, at this point, we kind of have this meandering section, which is usually my favourite bit of the show after we do the two songs, where we just talk about whatever comes into our heads. Sometimes we mess around so much as well, which I think is part of the appeal of the show and why we have maybe a core listenership. But also sometimes we'll be talking about a specific thing to do with chords or lyrics or structures, and we'll just go off on that until we feel like we've concluded, and then
it's kind of normally the extension of an idea, and then by the time that we've got to, I think, 3 Beatles references deep, we know that it's about time to cut it and move on to the next section.
Yeah, I mean, you say about kind of messing around. You're sort of your friends outside. How long have you known each other? You're friends outside the podcast, aren't you?
How long have we known each other?
Years
and years.
Years and years. Well, like 8 years, I want to say, something like that. I think I was like 23 when we met, and I'm 31 now.
I can tell you it would have been 2015, 16 kind of time, so...
7-8 years then.
Yeah, that sort of broadly speaking lines up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean that helps when you're having that kind of unstructured conversation in the middle. I think, on some podcasts it can feel a little bit forced, and when you know that sort of the co-hosts don't really speak to each other much outside of the podcast. Although in that same vein, I feel like sometimes when you're listening to a co-hosted podcast and you listen to them every week bantering that, you kind of assume they're like best of friends, whereas it's probably not always the case. It's more like colleagues sometimes. But yeah, it's cool that you've got that chemistry, and if you feel that helps, keep people interested as well, that it's authentic, then that's good. So do you market the podcast actively at all, or do you just go on word of mouth, or how do you get the word out?
I think this is probably the area that we're, self-admittedly, we're probably slightly weaker on. I think Roger said it best earlier in that we've got like a core listener group who will always come back to us when we release a new season. We have tried for various promotional things at the moment. I will say that the ones that I've been in charge of, I've let go because I'm very poor at that kind of thing. But we've had discussions about it, how to better promote it. That's about all I have for that answer.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's honest. It's good.
I think from my perspective, I just agree with Declan. It's definitely one of the weaker parts of our production. That said, we're on our 17th season now, as I said earlier, and we do improve slightly every season.
So
like
essentially what you're saying is just start at the beginning and then listen to the most recent episode and just stay for the slight progression.
I'll give you a good example of how we kind of fall short, and this is on me, is I handle the majority of the Instagram stuff. Like, we have an Instagram and a Facebook and a YouTube and all this sort of thing, and I do the Instagram. And at the beginning of the season, I said to Declan, what I'll do is, because I'm all right with Photoshop, I said I'll create some simple season 17 out now, streaming now sort of thing, and every episode we'll take it in turns to post these things. And I was late making them, and I was late putting them up for a couple of episodes as well. But the thing is, we didn't announce it. I feel like if we'd have announced that we're going to do something, we will do it. But the fact that it was in-house and it was just kind of an idea that we were trying out, it's tricky kind of balancing the songwriting and the production and the editing of the show, and then doing the graphic design and social media stuff on top of that. So it's a tough balance, but it's one that I think we both want to improve at,
And do you sell your music at all? Or is there any kind of... And obviously you enjoy doing the podcast, and that was kind of the main reason why you started. Is there any other kind of goal for it? Like, are you hoping to lead people onto your music outside of the podcast and things like that?
Well, one of the more recent seasons we did was kind of just a challenge for us of like writing 14 songs within a month each. And sort of, as well as doing that as a podcast season, one of the sort of things we agreed was like, well, let's try and make an album together out of it. And we did. The album's out now. Our project is called Schnookums, SCHNOOKUMS. And it's
cool. Like,
you heard the first sort of versions of that on the podcast. We've now gone and done that as its own thing. We intend to do more of it, but then that's also kind of just linked into the fact of we just like making music. So like one does lead on to the other, but they are just kind of linked by a shared love of the creation of music.
Yeah, I'd say that the Schnookums thing is the main thing we really try to send people towards, We also each do our own solo stuff, but Schnookums is really the kind of main thing we try to kind of push people towards listening to. But I mean, we have a Bandcamp where the album is purchasable, because you asked about things we're kind of like maybe monetizing or selling outside of it. But at the same time, everything's streaming on, you know, Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal and stuff. It was all on there anyway. So there's not kind of like a sales motivation going on in our heads. I mean, I hope I speak for both of us here. It's more just like Declan said, we both make music anyway. We probably would have made this album anyway. We'd probably be writing songs all the time anyway. So it just so happens that we have this on-air rapport where our listeners can maybe check that stuff out too, you know?
I think Roger has also done like slightly more polished versions of the weekly songs as well as standalone releases. He's much more productive than I am on this regard. So, but yeah, it is. That's kind of like, if there's any sort of pipeline towards anything, it is just towards that, because they are so linked.
Yeah, I mean that is a good avenue, because on the other side of things, like you say, you struggle with marketing, and I know a lot of podcasters have the same troubles, but musicians definitely struggle with marketing, like, because it is, as a musician myself, like. It like at the end of the day, you're having fun when you're doing it, and you're putting your message out there, and there's the emotional aspect of it. You, if you're writing your own music, and it's like sometimes you think, well, if we make money, then that's nice, and if we don't, then well, we've had fun, and I think that leads people to, you know, take on big gigs where they don't get paid, or you know, have to pay to play or whatever. But a podcast as a tool for a musician for content marketing is kind of perfect when you think about it. If you can play your own songs on there, talk about them, and then lead people on. So, you know, even if that's not your, you know, you're not too fussed about it and that's not your end goal, it does still feel like quite a good opportunity that you've got there.
We were talking about this the other day, actually. Like, I was saying, like, if we had a podcast where it was just us two and we just went, here's our songs that we write, like, there wouldn't be much of a draw for people to listen to it, because we'd just be a drop of people doing that kind of thing in an ocean of other people. But the fact that there's a challenge and there's, like, I was reading the other day about that thing to do with a piece of content online or anywhere should either, like, you know, entertain, inform, you know, be aspirational or whatever. And I feel like we, because of our natural, like, rapport with each other, it is probably, I don't know, it feels corny to say, but we probably are entertaining in some way. And also there's the educational thing of, like, if you're a brand new songwriter and you're like, I don't know where to start, it is a resource too. It's like, you could hear us kind of go, we talk technical sometimes, but generally speaking, we talk about the sort of like logistical thing of, you know, oh, okay, so I had like 6 hours left to write a song, which is a thing that people come across all the time, you know, and then we were thinking, okay, what shall I do now? And I came up with this idea that I came up with earlier in the week and developed that, and so on and so forth. So it's a practical tool as well that isn't just us kind of being entirely self-serving, you know.
Because you could do something similar about dissecting other songs that have been written. We have covered that once or twice, and there are podcasts out there that do that, things like Dissect, which is a great podcast, but you're lacking kind of the personal connection to it. I think that's kind of part of why we work so well in terms of discussing this together, because we know the sort of whole process of it. So like it's almost like demystifying it, like the amount of times where one of us has said something like, I really like that element, that's really cool, how did you come up with that? Oh, I just chucked it in there last minute. Like it's kind of lends its own like vibe to the whole conversation, which you wouldn't get with like an outsider perspective.
Yeah, so it seems like your ideal listener really is someone, a beginner who's learning how to write music and also happens to be a fan of your style of music as well. And it's quite niche, but that's not a bad thing, really.
Well, I've always thought that, like, most good songs could be stripped down to their acoustic version, you know, like without any drums or whatever on them. And that's kind of, well, there are exceptions on the show, but like we generally bring like a mostly acoustic demo. And I feel like maybe that appeals to quite a lot of people who like different genres, because it's not necessarily for like folk acoustic fans, the show. It's just for music fans in general, like, because a lot of these songs that will start out very acoustic and quiet will develop into like these huge punk rock songs, or like maybe stuff that's more heavy, or stuff that's more jazzy, or like in a musical or something like that. So I guess the appeal is kind of niche in terms of the listeners, but not the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I suppose it's popular music at the end of the day, isn't it? It's all kind of based off the same kind of structure.
More about the sort of act of creating music than it is about the music in and of itself in a weird way. Like I hope people like the music, but at the end of the day, it you know, the bulk of the episodes is us talking about creating, which is a weird thing to discuss, but we do our best.
And you're using SoundCloud, aren't you, to host your podcast?
That's right. Yeah, we use SoundCloud, but the way we've got it rigged is that it goes up on SoundCloud. We have a SoundCloud Pro account, so we got unlimited upload space, and then that goes out via, I think, an RSS feed to, you know, Spotify, Apple Music, and all the other places that podcasts go.
Okay, yeah, because it's not the first one that comes to mind, and I feel like for people listening who have struggled or are struggling to choose a podcast host, it can be difficult because there are just so many and they all seem to do basically the same thing. But I guess as musicians, you're already familiar with SoundCloud as it is, so it's kind of logical to use it for the podcast too.
Yeah, it's kind of just what we were aware of. I think we both had personal SoundClouds anyway, so I think when Roger sort of mentioned, oh wait, it's got an RSS feed and you can link it to this, that and the other, at that point it just made sense to.
I think it's also the less technical option to SoundCloud, because if you have that RSS feed, you can kind of just like drag and drop stuff into there. So I think it's a really good place for like new podcasters to try out.
And then just like one more thing on the monetization side of things, I noticed that you had a sponsor for some episodes. Is that something you put together, or did a sponsor reach out to you?
We reached out to them, so it felt like a really good match. I think for one of my birthday, somebody got me a Journeyman notebook, and they're these notebooks with like you can either get the ones with like 5 lines for like a manuscript stave, and then like the other side of the booklet is blank for lyrics, or like lined for lyrics, or you can get ones with like 6 or 4 strings for guitars or ukuleles, as my lovely friend Declan's holding up there. And we reached out to them. And so I got one of these, and I said to Declan, what do you think of trying to get these guys as a sponsor? And I just emailed, because they're a small e-commerce store. I emailed them and I said, hi, I literally use your books. I run this songwriting podcast with my friend, and would you be interested in sponsoring the show? And they said yes, and they sponsored season 16, I want to say. Or was it 15?
I think it might have been... I'm not sure if it was 14. Could have been 15.
Oh my god. Well, anyway, what
they
are the previous
sponsored a
seasons?
season.
Yeah.
And how's that gone in terms of being mutually beneficial to you and the sponsor?
I mean, good, I think. I mean, it worked well for that season. I'm not privy to their stats, you know, on their website or anything. It was very much a kind of like we arranged it, that we agreed on a fee for the season, and that we would do certain things like, you know, mention them every week. And we also arranged that they would have we would announce a discount code that people could use on the show so that they could go to the website and that sort of thing. So it seemed mutually beneficial at the time. I think it worked well.
Yeah, it'd be good to sort of try that again if the timing is right again.
Absolutely. In fact, we reached out to them this season to say, hey, we're doing season 17, would you be keen? And the owner, Tim, had just had his first child. So he was like, I'm up to my neck, we're busy, maybe next time, reach out to me next time. So that was one of those bad timing things, you know?
Right. Yeah, because I feel like sponsorships, adverts, it's kind of the go-to thing when people think of they want to make money out of a podcast. Because if you don't have a course or a business or anything outside of that, and nothing to sell of your own, then selling someone else's products is the easiest way of doing it. But yeah, I think people don't know who to reach out to sometimes, or how to reach out to them, and what to do in terms of agreement for money, like percentages wise and things like that. Did it all go kind of smoothly? Did they give you a sort of percentage of your affiliate cuts, or did you have to negotiate that?
It wasn't very complicated. Basically, I think we agreed on I think it was £90, £80, £90, something like that, for them to sponsor the whole season, and we would kind of mention them once per episode, and also they sent us some books that we could use for our songwriting as well. So it was quite sort of low key, if you know what I mean. It was just quite a simple transaction and just friendly, and it didn't feel like forced at all either. I think it just felt like, this makes sense. Songwriting podcasts, songwriting books. It's not like we chased it even. We just it just sort of happened. We just asked them.
I think you say as well, like, it can be difficult to sort of think of what to reach out for in terms of that. And Roger touched upon it there briefly. Like, it does make sense. That sort of deal did make sense, but it's not. It's difficult to sort of think of other things that would relate to the content and the listeners would find like valuable or useful, or that would drive business to the sponsor.
Yeah, it's an interesting way for them to do it as well, because as far as I'm aware, I think most sponsors wouldn't pay up front. They'd give you 10-20%, hopefully more, of whatever revenue comes through via your code. So it's quite good that you got money up front for that. So I guess people just need to try and reach out more. I know it can be nerve-wracking, but the fact that you just thought of something that you used, so it's not like you're trying to sell something just for the sake of it, and also that was a perfect match. And I guess the fact that you used the product before helps to get them to even open your email and take an interest.
Yeah.
So it's quite good to think about for people looking for sponsors, I think.
I think it's just about being authentic and friendly and real. I think you kind of recognize when you get something in your inbox and it just feels like it's been copy and pasted to a 1,000 different people. Whereas if you have like a friendly conversation where you go, hey, I love the stuff you're making, we do a podcast about that. What do you reckon?
It's when you see like the podcast come into the podcast. It's when you see the emails come into like the podcast email account, and they start off with "Hello, the Weekly. We really like your podcast." It's at that point you think, maybe don't chase that one.
Yeah, I feel it makes me wonder, like, how much money do these people make who are just sending out these blanket emails, because they just get deleted, don't they? But yeah, I mean, I get them for like my YouTube channel and things like that, and it's just like, this is completely not what I would sell, or it's like they're offering me services that I already provide. So you can tell that they haven't taken any care at all. So yeah, I think the takeaway there is to find, like, I don't know, 10 companies that you think would be perfect for you to sell their product, and think about why, and then reach out to them with that.
Absolutely. I think another thing we've considered before, which maybe we'll do in the future, I don't know, but is starting an account like with Ko-fi, K-O-F-I, where you could just mention it on the show, like, hey, if you want to help with the upkeep of the show and you're enjoying what you're hearing, find us at Ko-fi/Weekly Song Podcast or something. We haven't done that yet, but that maybe is something we could do in the future. That's another tool.
Or things like Patreon, we've discussed that before. The difficulty is trying to find like relevant sort of rewards for like the different members, the different levels of like how much you could donate. Like, I think the best we've come up with is like early access to like the MP3s that we use in the show, or like scans of what we've written down in the books and everything, which it might be of interest, but that's about as much as we can think of with the current setup that we have.
Yeah, people talk about like passive income, but it's not really passive. You have to put the work in and then think about how many hours that's taking you and how much is bringing in, and then you find out that it's not even like minimum wage or whatever when you do the maths. But it's the fact that you produce content that isn't just the podcast, just like integral to the show. I feel like it helps because I guess patrons could get the songs for free, like the free down. I mean, they can stream them anyway, I suppose. But if they're getting the song every episode included in their subscription, then that'd be cool. Or some kind of behind the scenes, or
I think that's the tough thing with
behind the scenes
with anything
recording.
that's additional content is like you were saying, Declan, and like you were just saying, Joe, as well, is thinking of something that's worth people's time and money, that's interesting beyond just the show. I mean, like, if we had, infinite time every single week, I feel like we'd maybe make extra video podcasts, and, like, we've talked about, like, maybe reviewing albums we like with songwriting we like on those albums. So if we had the time, then we could make all that stuff and put it up on the Patreon and stuff. But you've just got to think about how much capacity you have in a week, and if that's just a podcast, I mean, a podcast is great, then, I think that's okay.
I mean, it's quite telling that we did do a couple of shows like that during the pandemic, where we suddenly did have a lot more free time on our hands. We did like shows discussing songwriting in and of itself more, and like discussing various records that we'd listened to, and it worked fine then, and it was sort of a fun way to sort of keep doing something during that period. But it's not as sustainable in the long run. At least not for us, not that we found at the moment.
Yeah, and once you're charging people, you can't just drop off at that point. Like, you've got that responsibility. Speaking of the pandemic, did you find that your stats went up at all? Like, I think a lot of people found that people listening to content and watching content more. I don't know if it made a difference to your growth.
I think we noticed a slight increase, but I also just found it easier to keep it consistent, sort of getting consistent numbers back in and things like that. It also helped us level up our game with just the whole audio setup with everything, and sort of sharing a bit more of like the editing of the show and everything, and like the behind the scenes stuff made us sort of up our game that wise. So I don't know how much that translated to sort of subscriber count or anything like that, but
yeah, I mean, I've got to admit, I don't think either of us really look at the stats all that much. Like, because we do it sounds so unprofessional or whatever, but we're not doing this to like have some kind of huge podcast spike in growth or anything like that. We do it primarily because we like talking to each other and we like writing songs. That's kind of the huge impetus to do the show. I think during the pandemic, I think it steadied out, but I think that, like you said, Declan, I think that's really because we steadied out in terms of our output. I think that helped.
Yes, we have noticed during seasons before you can have like one episode will get like twice the listens of another one or something like that. So yeah, it was more consistent then.
Have you noticed any pattern in the episodes that do get more listens?
I have actually, because our titles for each episode, we have like the number of the episode, and then we have like a title, and it's usually just the funniest thing we say in the show. Like, we'll just have an inside joke or something, and some funny phrase will come out, and that will be the title. But I've noticed the ones that get a few more listens than the others are if we mention someone who's famous. Like, if we mention like Todd Rundgren or Paul McCartney or like Brian Wilson or something like that, like those ones will get more traction. And I think I know why. Like, I've discovered podcasts that I listen to because I've searched in my podcast, on Spotify or whatever. I've searched I remember I searched Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian Jerry Seinfeld once. and this podcast called Tuesdays with Stories came up, and they were talking about Seinfeld in that episode. And
yeah.
I just checked them out, and I subscribed to them, and I've been listening to them ever since. And that was like 7 years ago. So I think that helps sometimes, but we're really not that great with search engine optimization or anything. But, you know, we kind of, if something works, we keep doing it, but generally speaking, we don't think about it too much.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just scrolling through your list now of episodes. We've got I Jazzed All Over the Place.
Yes.
We're not usually rude like that.
Charizard.
It's just the sort of thing of we've started saying this in the episodes now, where we just come out with the most random stuff, just out of jokes with each other. Like, that's the title. Like it started off,
yeah.
I think there are a few early episodes where like the titles aren't actually anything we say, but it has to be something we say in the show now. I quite like it, just from a structural point of view, if we can try and keep it near the end.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Whereas if we sort of have the jokey title at the beginning, I wonder what effect that has on the audience.
Also, another little piece of SEO we do is in the title, we'll have the number of the episode, then the little funny quote thing for the title, and then we have in brackets music/songwriting. Because I think again, that sort of searching something, if someone's searching for songwriting advice or some kind of resource, they're not going to search, you know, Charizard or whatever, you know what I mean? They're going to search music or songwriting, so having that, I think, optimizes us a little bit more.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough balance between just like good titles, enticing ones, and stuff that attracts people's attention, and, you know, kind of shocking stuff or whatever, and SEO, because if you over optimize, it can just get a bit boring. Like, and how many search terms are there for your particular niche? So yeah, just having the terms songwriting and music in there a lot will hopefully help. And you've got your show notes as well. Seems like your show notes are a bit more lengthy in the older episodes. I know it's like an extra thing you have to do, but that is another place you can slip in some SEO terms in it.
It is. I mean, the other great thing about SoundCloud as well is it allows you to add tags. Now, I don't know whether those tags translate to Spotify or things like that, but we do put tags in from time to time to, you know, to see. But I think with the show notes thing, again, it's just about the capacity we have for that week. You know, oftentimes we'll get home from work, and because we take it in turns as to who edits, and it'll just be a case of, okay, edit the episode, make sure it sounds good, make sure we like what we hear, upload it, and then to kind of sit down and like write some copy for it is just an extra thing that if you want to do it really well, it could take like another half an hour, which is so worth it if you have the time, but I don't think we often do.
It also depends if there's something structurally unusual with the episode that you can put in the copy. That's great. That will draw a curious listener in. But at the same time, as it's the conversations really that vary in the episode. The structure itself doesn't so much. So the main draw of it is just the two of us talking. So it's difficult to convey that differently week on week without just like transcripting what we're saying. But it is something that we should probably look at a bit more if we're honest.
No, I can see how it'd be hard for your podcast because it's not like you're, you know, interviewing something and then you cover 10 topics. It's like a song and then you're talking about the song. So you can't really write show notes about the song that would be useful to anyone. Like, you're not going to put the structure and the chord progressions, and that's not helpful as show notes. But yeah, I can see how that'd be tricky.
When we do like the slightly different episodes, like when I think Roger's done like some solo interview episodes and like more talking about songwriting generally, that is the point where we can confidently, like you say, we have multiple items on an agenda that we can put in there to sort of sort of make it easier for people to find what they're looking for.
And the cool thing with our show as well is, like, because we don't have like a massive audience, but we do have like a core listenership that seems to have stuck around like the whole time, which is great. It's like, I think once you kind of discover the show and you like our rapport and you're into songwriting, you kind of get it. You kind of get what the whole like MO of the show is. And so then it's just a case of like subscribing, and then every time we upload an episode, your phone, you know, lights up, and you kind of you listen to us every week rather than it being something that evolves or anything like that, you know. We try to evolve like in small ways, but generally speaking, it's just we know our format and we stick to it.
You said earlier about that you didn't think you would be able to get through the recording of the podcast, basically, Roger, that you thought you'd be like stumbling over your words and things. How did you get over that, and how long did it take?
Well, I mean, it's still an ongoing thing. Like, I'm quite a nervous person, generally speaking, but I can speak on mic quite confidently now. And I was even saying to Declan, like, after the first or second episode we recorded for season 17, this most recent one, I was like, I feel so confident now. And I think now it's starting to click a little bit. But in the early days, like, I think we were both pretty nervous and both pretty new to the whole thing. Probably took me about a year or two to get like anywhere near confident. I think what helped with my confidence was having something of a structure to the show. Like, we know who's going first, we know who's going second, we know who's reading the emails that week if we have emails come in. That kind of puts my mind at ease, because I know that once I've finished saying one thing, I know that something else is about to happen. So structure helps, but also just experience, you know, just doing it all the time just helps, you know.
What about you, Declan? Did you have the same issue?
To a lesser degree. I did acting at university. I find myself relatively comfortable on stage in front of a microphone. With the podcast, I think I have the opposite thing. Like, where if I'm talking a bit more personally or something like that, that's where I begin to sort of have a bit of issues. But I sort of just find it easy to lose myself in the conversation, like to the point where we sometimes just forget that the mics are on. It's moments like that where I just sort of have a brain blank or something that I worry about, and that's the joy of editing, where I can just take them all out and make myself sound really clever.
Oh yeah,
I love editing. It's a secret tool. But yeah, to a lesser degree, but I think we have notably sort of improved in terms of our banter and sort of our rapport as the seasons have gone on. Because as Roger mentioned earlier, we used to do them like live in the same room and everything. Practical considerations and the world getting a bit ill put ill to that after a while. So we sort of had to almost relearn that, doing it sort of through our chosen sort of hosting audio call sessions. But yeah, we've got to a point now where we've clicked quite easily with that, and yeah. Long way of saying not really, but yes.
No, that's good. Like, you can, I think, especially when you're doing it all yourself as a podcaster, there's so many skills that are needed. If you do all facets of it, like obviously the speaking on a mic and the technical knowledge, marketing, writing, and just all sorts, even though it's just sort of an audio medium. But I think everyone has some kind of skill that they can bring to podcasting. And obviously for you, you've had some, you did acting in uni, and you've done some, you've got experience behind a mic, and presumably you've got all the technical knowledge as well with the mics and all that, which is something that most struggle with at the beginning.
Well, it's kind of why the podcast was kind of an easy sort of thing to sort of realise would be fun to do, is because as musicians we kind of had those skills anyway. Yeah, makes sense. Is there any other skills either do you feel that you've brought to it that have helped when you're podcasting?
Well, I'm a podcast editor by trade. That's like my day job. So
it helps a little bit.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, so that helps a lot. And,
Cool.
I studied sound engineering at college and university, so I bring that to the table to some extent. Things like EQing, compressing, saturating, all these different things, and making sure the episode's mastered to a good quality and that sort of thing. But we both do that, that's not just me. We take turns editing, and we both EQ, compress, master, mix, all these different things. So that helps. I think that kind of helps, like, right out of the gate, our audio quality is always good. We always have good sounding episodes. So I think there's nothing worse than when you tune into a podcast for the first time and you go, oh man, they're recording through like really grainy microphone, or just like the audio quality cuts in and out, or the diaphragm of the mic is vibrating or something. It's a kind of turn off. So I think having that audio engineering background, and like I say, editing, I edit every day anyway, so I'm always kind of, that muscle is always exercised, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, I feel like you could get away with it a bit more maybe 10 years ago, when there were only sort of 2 or 3 podcasts in any particular niche, and if your audio didn't sound good, then that's all there was. But nowadays, you kind of do have to stand out with the audio quality as well as the content. And just a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up. Are there any particular episodes that you've made that have really stood out, that you remember, that you're not going to forget, that have, your favourite episodes? If we start with you, Declan, if you can think of anything.
I think the one that sort of sticks in my memory the most was when we decided to be really stupid and write songs that went the same forwards as backwards. That was challenging. Particularly more challenging for Roger, as he actually learnt the song forwards and backwards properly, whereas I sort of cheated mine a little bit. But I sort of remember us getting a little hysterical's not the word, but like a bit goofy towards the end of that one, as we were going a little nuts with the challenge.
What about you, Roger? Anything come to mind?
Again, the challenge ones, they're the ones that I recall the most because they really stood out. Like, we did one, like, write a song in the style of, like, 1920s, 30s vaudeville. We've done ones of write a song in each other's style, which was interesting. So I wrote a Declan song, and Declan wrote a Roger song. That was another interesting one.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and listen to some of these episodes, I think. I've heard a few of the more recent ones, but I want to hear the backwards, the palindrome song now.
That was so crazy to do.
I'm impressed by the amount you committed to it.
Well, I had to, for the listeners,
Anything for the listeners, yeah. And then finally, what's next for the podcast? Like, where do you see it in sort of 2 or 3 years' time? Do you see yourself sort of going more into the monetization things, or just continuing on having fun making more songs?
I kind of see it because like I've said before, we both said before, we've got our format, so we kind of know what we're doing, so that probably won't change. As far as monetizing, I mean, it would make sense to at least cover sort of the SoundCloud costs for, because they have £10 a month to have Spotify Pro. So covering that would be great. Beyond that, we're not like looking to, get any massive sponsorships. That would be great. But I think kind of more of the same. Probably we'll do another season of challenges at some point, I would have thought. Because sometimes we do like a regular season. Like this season's just a regular, like, write a song every week. And sometimes we do seasons where it's like, these are the challenges for the season. So I don't know. I guess we need to talk about it.
Yeah, the thing is, we sort of just decide on a whim, like, do you want to do another season of the podcast? Has enough time passed for you yet that you've got enough life experiences to write about? Yeah, I think I can go with Roger. Like, the core of it is still fun, and we've demonstrably got the means to keep producing it in the way it is. Hopefully we can keep getting it slightly better. Might be worth looking at some more monetization down the line, other things that we can be doing on the top of it. But yeah, I think just incremental upgrades rather than like any big game changer.
If it isn't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, well, and yeah, I mean, if you're having fun with it, then that is kind of, that helps to motivate yourself. If I'm sure some people are making podcasts each week and it starts to feel like a bit of a slog, but if you can keep that passion as a backbone, then that helps you stay consistent and keep going.
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
So for anyone who's learning songwriting or wants to hear some awesome music or just wants to hear like a really interesting and unique style of podcast, then you can find the Weekly Song Podcast on all your favourite podcast platforms. And thank you to Roger and Declan. It's been really, really great speaking with you and learning about more about the podcast.
Thank you, Joe.
And thank you
for having us on.
For taking an hour out of your day to speak with us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Really lovely to chat with you, Joe. And best of luck with the show going forward.
It's that. Thank you very much.
Cool. You too. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.